Hi, everyone. Welcome to another meeting of our Adult Ed Weekly Virtual Job Club. Tonight, we're going to talk about how you put together your work history, what kinds of things should be included, how do you explain gaps. Most of this is not to hand over to the employer, but more as a tool for you to use when you're filling out job applications. And then we're also going to look at samples of reference letters because, and the difference between reference letters, professional character reference, and then also just how to prepare your reference list that you would turn over to your employer. So I'm going to get started by sharing my screen. I hope. And I'm already not in the place I wanted to be. Okay, so are you seeing Adult Ed Virtual Job Club?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, let me get this started. Okay. Come on. Okay, so we're talking about work history and professional references tonight. First thing and I have one additional thing that I wanted to tell everybody about, and that is Waubonsie is going to host another small virtual job fair this Monday, the 17th. Is from noon to 1 p.m. And the employers who will be presenting there or who will be available to talk to there is the Forest Preserve District for King County, Hollywood Casino, and New Era Support Services. And that's like helping in-home care or maybe facility care for people with who need assistance. So that's what they do. You have to pre-register. So you go to waubonsie.edu/job fair, and basically you're going to give them your name and your email address. They will send you the link then on how to get in. It'll be a Zoom, and there will be hosts greeting you at the Zoom, and you can tell them who it is that you want to talk to. There should be a variety of all types of jobs, some full-time, some part-time, some seasonal. So it also is an opportunity to practice interviewing. We never get enough of that. So that would be a good thing if you have an opportunity to pop in there from noon to 1 Monday. Okay, so the first part we're going to talk about is work history. What should you include? How do you discuss gaps in your employment? How far back should you go? And then I like to show the benefit of using Career Coach in creating your work history. So we'll take a little look at that. And I found this. I might put this in every single one of the ones that I do because I think that this is such a clever idea. This particular slide was put together in working with youth, trying to get them to think about what kinds of skills that you might use in various tasks. You know, when you're talking to youth, they don't have previous job history, so they don't have anything to really put on their resume in terms of, this is the job I had, these are the skills I learned there, or the tasks that I was assigned to do. So they did this article, and it's called The Skills for Carving a Pumpkin, Necessary to Carve a Pumpkin. So they divided it into 3 categories: planning and organizing, personal safety, and creativity. When I say those words, and I don't talk about related to a pumpkin, it sounds like I'm talking about any kind of resume, business, any kind of work that you're doing. Those are terms that we use, but we don't necessarily think about them in terms of our everyday task. So what they outlined was that if you think about all that's involved when you carve a pumpkin, first you have to get the pumpkin. You have to store it somewhere. Then you have to decide what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, because you're probably going to need tools. You may need some kind of way to design. So there's equipment that you might need in order to decorate the pumpkin, let's say for Halloween, not just the fall. So that's your planning and organizing part of carving a pumpkin. Then we think about personal safety, and there are many, many jobs, almost everything in retail, anything in manufacturing. I know that Amazon is huge about safety on the job. So thinking about personal safety, you're going to be carving a pumpkin. There's with a knife or some kind of, I know they have pumpkin cutters. Some people use little saws. I mean, but whatever it is, it's going to be sharp, whatever it is that you're using. So you know that you're going to have to take care on how you use the tools, especially if you're working with, say, your children, or you're doing this in a school setting. You want to be supervising, you want to give them as blunt of an instrument as you possibly can. And then you might want to talk about before you even start carving, okay, let's say I cut myself, what should I have near me to deal with the cut, should I have that? The last thing you want to do is cut yourself while you're carving and then be running around the house trying to figure out where's a Band-Aid, where's antiseptic. So that's something to think about. And then creativity. Think about all the different things that you have seen either carved or drawn on a pumpkin. And I don't know many people who, when they do something that is extremely creative, who don't first have a plan. So they've got a sheet that they're drawing, whatever the design is going to be, and they're thinking about placement of it, and then they have to transfer it over to the pumpkin. And those are all things that show your creativity. So just from a simple task that most of us just think of as a fun thing to do for Halloween, you are displaying planning and organizing, personal safety, and creativity. And the reason we're going to go back to Career Coach is we're going to look at some of the details or tasks that they outline that might apply to some of these things, so that we get what's the right wording. We wouldn't necessarily use carving a pumpkin if we were putting together what our skills are, but we could talk about planning and organizing various activities, and we don't have to say what those are, and then determining what supplies you might need, gathering the supplies, all of these categories relative to activities, not necessarily carving a pumpkin. But I thought this was a great creative way, especially because this particular one was designed to show to youth, which almost every child has had some experience with pumpkins, especially for Halloween. Okay, so when we talk about the history section for your resume, the things that you always want to show: the name of the company, where it's located, what job titles you had, what dates you were there. I like what they say here about try to focus more on what you actually accomplished. So not just the tasks of the job but let's say you reorganized something, or you were responsible for a particular task, say for the whole department. Those are the kinds of things, because you're showing that you're responsible, or you developed a shortcut, or you put together, you organized an Excel sheet to keep track of details. All of those kinds of things are what you want to add in your accomplishments and your responsibilities, more so than just listing general tasks. They want things to be somehow quantified. And if there's a way that you, in anything that you've done, either in your personal life or in your work life, you have saved money by figuring out something or reorganizing a task, that's something that you want to put in here. And should you have gotten a promotion or you received an award, this is where you would want to make a list of that. So I'm going to show you a couple of templates that you can use, and the web address for these templates is on the slide. But this is a way for you to organize before you put anything in the on an application or in your resume. This is a great way for you to organize what your job history is, because it's so, for example, let's say you just finished school, and for the first 3 months you weren't working, you weren't in school. This kind of shows, here's your starting, your end date, and you can say what you did in the gap. Then when you're doing your resume, you can determine whether you want to put that in there or not, but this is kind of a reminder to you that this happened. So for our students who have relocated, say from another state, from another country, you had to get used to and acclimated and get your family situated in a new area and make all of the necessary I forgot the word I want to use, but like the connections, you have to make the connections so that they can go to school, and you start setting up your life here. That takes time to do. So any employer is going to understand a gap when you move to a new area. And then here is, okay, so let's say you have your first job. They're showing month and year. It's also possible, especially if you stayed there longer than 1 year, to just use year as opposed to the month and the year. But whatever you use on one of them, continue using that for every one of these entries on your resume. On this, you can put down month and year, but then from this, decide how you want to list it on your resume. You want to be consistent. So this also, I liked this because it's written either if you're in school or if you're working. Here's all the information you need to have. These are the positions that you held. Maybe you can abbreviate what your duties are, because this isn't very much room. Having the supervisor's name is really important, because in many job applications that you're going to fill out, they ask for the supervisor's name. And then even if, and we'll talk about this when we're talking about interviews, you never want to get into a discussion about money if you can help it. But as a reminder to you of what you made, when you first leave a job, you think, well, I'm going to remember that. But a couple of years later, you might not. And your resume is something that probably it's a good idea to update every year, because your responsibilities change, the amount of money changes. So even if you don't update your resume, at least update your work history. And that's what this is. And then it gives you another spot for if you aren't working. If you don't have a gap, you just move on to the next job. Remember that this is chronological. So whatever the most recent thing is, so if you didn't have a gap right out of school or just moving here and you started a job right away, this part's going to be blank. But maybe I like that it has a gap, a job, or a school, a gap, a job, or a school, because it also reminds you that that could happen, but it gives you a place to place it, and then decide later what you want to put on your resume. This is another example of a way that you can summarize your work history. This one does not offer a space for a gap, but now having seen that on the other, the previous slide that we just looked at, that they do have that, it's fine to just use one of these and just write in gap and then what the reason was, maybe up here, and then the dates of the gap instead of dates of employment. Okay. I like that it has the beginning salary and the ending salary. I think that's a good thing. We don't always remember that. Your supervisor's name and the title, that's also a good thing. And then this one adds the reason for leaving. And that's another thing that we can talk about when we talk about interviewing. But whatever your reason for leaving, you want to make sure that you write it and present it in a positive manner. We never want to say, I didn't like my boss, or I didn't like a coworker, or that you worked there a month and you left because you could make more money. You know, a lot of people will leave a job for 25 cents more an hour. An employer is always thinking, if I hire this person, are they going to stick around? So you want to be careful what your reason for leaving. And a great reason for leaving is that you're looking for new challenges or you want opportunity for growth. Okay, so that's this format. So that's another way that, and again, this is not how you're writing it in your resume. This is a worksheet for you to keep and use so that you can refer back to it. And the website is listed there on the bottom of the slide as well. Okay, so we already talked about when we're listing our jobs, we always do the most recent one first. And then there's the consistency about either use month and year or use year only. You're going to want to somehow account for gaps. It's easier if you do it on a resume or maybe a job application. I want to think about this. Just make sure that you do it in your work history so that you're reminded what happened. And I'm going to think about that for what we're going to put on the resume. And then so that you're not making multiple entries, you can instead have the employer listed once, but then maybe two different positions because you had a new position with the same employer. You want your job title, and you wouldn't put the person who you reported to on your resume, but you're probably going to be asked for it if you do an application. But having your job title, again, that's the reason why this, again, is for gathering our work history information so that it's a reminder as well as a resource when you are creating your resume and when you are filling out job applications. So having the job title, describing the duties. The other thing that's nice about this is when you first sit down, and especially jobs that you've had in the past, you might forget what some of the duties are. So I like putting this together. I like having it a digital document so that when I remember something that I did, or my memory is somehow triggered that I had these other responsibilities, or I did this, or I remember that, that we had this separate assignment. I've got to somehow get that in there. You can just, if you've got a digital copy, you can just go in and enter that as one of your duties and responsibilities. So that's a great skill by having it available to you digitally that so that you can update as you either think of things or as you have different experiences. These are things that you can quantify. So if you did, and quantify means like you're putting a number on it. I saved X number of dollars. I do a procedure that takes half the time. I supervise 3 people. I generated 3 new customers or clients for our business for our company. Anything that you can measure like that, put a number on it, those are the kinds of things that our employers are looking for. And then think about when you're the next one where they're talking about accomplishments, think about the job you're applying to. When you're doing this and you're putting your work history together, that's fine for you to be listing everything you can think of that you did. But what you're going to transfer over to your resume, you want to make sure that you think about the accomplishments that are relative to the job that you want. What is, like, for example, let's say you had, let's use that retail job that at Target as an example, because that even might be the next slide. Let's say I am applying for a job in a warehouse. Do I need customer service experience if I'm applying for a job in a warehouse? So I might not, I don't think you do, unless there is something in the job description that talks about dealing with customers. And generally, warehouse people don't deal with customers. So that would be more, you like working in a team. Warehouses tend to be looking for teams. So if in my resume, in my list of tasks, I have customer service, but the job I'm applying for doesn't require that, I can take the customer service out and put another detail in that might fit that job better. So those are the kinds of things. Remember, in our last meeting, we compared the standard tasks for the retail salesperson's job compared to the ad for the Aldi sales associate. And I took out some of the things that I had on my resume or my work history. I took out the part about suggesting people's schedules, because there was nothing in the Aldi associate job that referred to that. So I'm going to take something out that's valuable space in my resume to put something else in. If I'm a sales associate, I want to make sure that I'm putting customer service and those types of things in there. Okay, so that's kind of what we're talking about when we're thinking about these. I don't think I said this anywhere, but we're talking about, generally speaking, you don't have to go back more than 10 years. Now, if you've had an employment gap, and you have to go back further than 10 years, that's not a problem. Or you had a job that you were at for so many years that it goes back 10 years. They just don't want you going back to the part-time job that you had while you were in high school, or unless it specifically applies to the job that you're applying for. And the way you can handle that, rather than adding work history, is, let's say in that job that you had in high school, you learned some skills. Like, when I was in college, I worked for a gift shop. And one of the side tasks that I learned how to do was entering some numbers in their bookkeeping system. So if I had a job that I was applying for that was going to involve bookkeeping, I would add the bookkeeping that I did in one of my skills, but I wouldn't add the gift shop as an employer, if that makes sense. And then you want to make sure that you are you're limiting yourself to one page. I think if you limit yourself to 10 years, there shouldn't be any reason why it's going to be longer than that. And I know I've said this before. I have worked for over 30 years and and had several jobs, and my resume is only one page. So if I can limit it to one page, I hope you can do that too. And this is where we are. So we're at the salesperson job, and we're going to look at what kinds of things how we want to word our tasks. So let's say you were a retail salesperson somewhere along the way, and you forgot the jobs that you used to do. If you read, these are, I couldn't fit on all of the tasks, but these are most of the tasks that they listed for a retail salesperson. I don't know if I worked in a gift shop, and I would not have remembered all of these things. I probably would have remembered pricing items. I would have talked about customer service, writing writing out their bills of sale. But I wouldn't have thought about how we took inventory, we cleaned shelves, we reorganized and decorated displays. And so there was so much more to the job that I don't think of. And I only thought of that right now because I was looking at some of the things that they did here. So I'm looking at this, and I'm looking to see if there's anything quantifiable. You're maintaining knowledge. Okay, I don't see anything on here that is specifically quantifiable, but being a retail salesperson, there's not a lot that a salesperson can do just on their own other than that number one thing about greeting customers. Remember that customer service is our thing. So of course, you're going to mention that and any other of the tasks that you did. However, the other thing I wanted to point out about this is coming back to Career Coach, putting in this section of preferred title what the previous job was that you did will give you work tasks for you to look through, and also give you the wording. Remember, we talked about we want to start with action verbs, and these have action verbs in them. So it's a way for us to remember what is good wording for our resumes, and also keeping those action verbs. We're using phrases. We're not using the first person, second person, third person. We're only using phrases, and we're starting each phrase with a verb. Okay, so that's, I know I say this in every one of our meetings, how much I like Career Coach, but having this as a tool, I have found myself looking back here for job details that didn't have anything to do with necessarily the resume, but just trying to see what kind of tasks were relative to a job. So there's so many things about Career Coach that make it valuable. Okay, the next area that we're going to talk about, remember, I want to just end with what we were talking about, compiling your work history. I know I went back and forth between what goes on your resume, what goes on the work history. The two templates that I showed you in here are for your use to summarize the previous work history or volunteer history as well. that you had, for you to summarize the dates, for you to get information about who your supervisor is. Those are all the kinds of questions on those templates that are going to be asked in job applications. The other things that we talked about, what I just ended with here, talking about career coach and how you write your skills and the tasks for a job, that I was talking about for your resume, not on the work history. Your work history can, even if you need more pages or you need to expand that area, that's fine, because you're not giving that to an employer and there's no limit on it. But when it's your resume that has the limit, and it's also job applications that you'll probably be limited in space as well. But having a place where you can go and reference that has all of your work history will make job applications and resumes really easy for you to tweak for every job you want to apply to. Okay, so that's one part of the hiring process, career search process. The other part of the hiring process, and I don't know, generally if you do an online application or even your first interview, I would definitely have, if I have an in-person interview or I'm going to have a Zoom interview, I would be paying very close attention to what they tell you that you need. Somewhere along the way, you are going to have to give professional references. Some businesses specify they have to be career related, not character related. So even if you have a neighbor who can verify and validate what a great person you are, how you take responsibility for things, that's different than in being in a work setting. Now, the thing that you can use as a career reference would be if you volunteer anywhere, your children's schools, at your church, in your neighborhood. There are so many places that people volunteer their time, and they forget that it's possible to ask someone that you volunteer with to write you a reference. Okay, so let's look at what these look like. These are the kinds of things, this is a whole list of, if you're putting together this reference page, who do you ask? What do you ask them to say about you? What kind of information should be included? These are all of the things that you would ask the reference to include. You always want to, of course, they need to explain who they are and how they know you and how long they've known you. But while they're talking about you, you want them to emphasize any skills that they can verify that they know that you have. The other thing that they mention in here is, if they don't say your references have to be professional, then make sure that for every one personal reference, so that could be your neighbor who talks about how you organize activities for the neighborhood kids, or knowing you to be a responsible parent or whatever, that those personal references, for every one of those you want 2 career references or professional references. And again, remember, professional can include volunteer situations. Let's see. Most places only ask for 3, but we've talked about this before, that definitely in education, I know they ask for at least 5. So if you can identify 5 people, the other reason that having 5 people is also good is you're not always asking, if you're really in the mode of, I'm looking for a job and I am seriously applying for everything that I can find that I think is a good fit for me, then not having the same reference every time, but having a variety of references or variety of ways that you know them, different businesses. So again, let's look at my resume. The Waubonsie one on Career Coach has Target and it also has Waubonsie. And I think it's got Edge on faculty for Waubonsie, but I'm not positive. Well, if I was going to ask for a professional reference and I want to work at a school, I'm going to ask one of my colleagues or supervisors from Waubonsie to write a letter of reference rather than someone from Target. Not that the Target one isn't valuable. They can mention skills that I have that are appropriate. However, the fact that I'm looking for a job in education, here's a reference from somebody who I worked for or with in education. So you want to do as much of that fitting the information you give, fitting the references to the job. Always have in mind the job that you're applying for. You want to make sure that you don't give out an old email address. So make sure, and again, I know I've said this before, but whoever you think could be a good reference for you, make sure that you ask them if they are willing to do that. Tell them about what you're thinking about looking for in terms of jobs. Ask them how they want to be contacted and ask them to share the contact information. And then anytime you are going to use them as a reference, make sure you ask them first, are there any changes in contact information? And hopefully you're going to get a call or contact from this employer because I'm applying for whatever position. But definitely you want to make sure that you let them know. And then the relevance, we just talked about that. And then I like this ending with being grateful. So make sure that you thank every reference that you use on for any interview that you go on. And then they suggest offer to return the favor. So if they're ever looking for employment, just keep, and it's real, this is that networking that we're talking about. And I think the figure, Jerry's going to talk to us again about LinkedIn next week, but I'm almost positive the figure of what percentage of jobs are acquired by networking is like 85%. It's a very small amount that come from just job applications or applying online. So keep that network going and your references are part of your network. And then if this is what your reference list is going to look like that you're going to give to the employers. So you would use the same heading that you use and the same, if you did any kind of formatting or design, you're going to use something in that same family of design or the same exact design as your resume. You're going to put all of your contact information on the top like you do in your resume. And then for each of your references, this is the information that you're going to give them. So the name, the title, the company's address, phone, and email, and then how you know them. Lots of times companies will ask how long you've known them. So if it's somebody that you've worked with for several years, you can put that in there as well. But you want to explain what the relationship is or was to you and this reference. So you'll have multiple sections of this same thing. So this is one reference, then we'll have like a couple of spaces, and then we'll have another section of this for your second reference and vice versa. Okay. So this is kind of the way, this is a template. I don't know that I would necessarily use this, but you certainly could use this. And these are all of your information. I like the idea, even if you use this, and I don't think I have the template address, I'll try to find it. And I'll send it out with the PowerPoint if I can find it again. But if not, using it, it would be easy to create this in a document, but you want to make sure that you're using the same kind of design like we talked about with your resume, your cover letter, and the professional reference page. And then, so this is another way that you can do it that's slightly different than the one before. Here is an example. So let's say, and I've had this experience, I know students who've had this experience, when you're asking someone to write a reference letter for you, they're going to ask you what you want in the reference. I mean, what you want in the letter, sorry. So this is a great template and example of somebody who knows you professionally, and they can kind of tweak it for whichever field you're in. Okay, so it says, you know, starting out with I highly recommend is awesome. How they know you, what your job was, how long you were there, what your responsibilities were. And then the second paragraph is going to outline things that they think you did exceptionally well. And then just an overall recommendation in the final paragraph. So it's not that complicated. And I think anybody who you ask to be a professional reference for you, this also helps them organize their thoughts, because the other thing, I don't think I mentioned this, when you ask somebody to be your professional reference, make sure that you send them a copy of your resume. And if you have a job description of what you're applying for, that might be a good thing for them to have, just so that if they are contacted, especially by phone, they might be taken by surprise if they get a phone call, and they would have all of the information with them. What your resume says, if they have this letter written, they'll have that information there. If the job description, they'll know what kinds of things they're looking for, which is what they're going to highlight, all of your excellent skills in those particular areas. That's what this section is. So looking at the details of the job that you're applying for, you want to pick out those important things, and usually they're listed in order of importance. You want to make sure that if this person that's your reference can will verify that you are excellent at all of these things, or, you know, if something is a great strength. Being flexible is a great thing. That's here. This is all going to be tailored to the job description that you're applying for. Okay. And then just a general comment on your recommendation. This is an example of a character reference, and it's somebody who knew this person. They're from the same town, or they seem to have knowledge about the same town, and they're explaining the person is applying for a job for the town. So what this person is highlighting is not only general characteristics, but also what characteristics might qualify them for the position in government, you know. And so we'd want to talk about honesty, we want to talk about organization, being able to communicate. Those are all really, really good things. If a character reference, this one doesn't mention, but it mentions that the person has lived in this town for most of their life, involved in local community, church, children's schools. These are all important things that the character reference is giving because you want to work for that town. And then gives another example of how this person has been involved in the town by being a member of a board, a town board. So that's what a character reference. They're not talking about having worked with you, but they're talking about knowing you as a community member. And again, anybody that you want to ask to do a character reference for you, give them this template as well, so they get an idea of what kinds of things they could write about. And here we are at the end of our presentation. Our very last slide is always how you can contact our advising team. So Tom and Marlena are our academic transition advisors, and I am Valerie Kazubel, your career advisor. I hope you found this information helpful. Next week, we are going to talk about the importance of networking and how you can use LinkedIn to do that. So I hope you'll join us next week.